I'm going to hand the baton to Diane Yentel, President and CEO of the National Low-Income Housing Coalition.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here for the Coalition's annual policy forum. We're so glad that you're here. It's really, sorry, trying to find a place. All right, I'm gonna have to put it there. It's really inspiring to be here with all of you, to be in this room filled with so many social justice and housing justice advocates. I think especially during such a tumultuous and uncertain time when there are so many threats to the programs that we care about most. And I think part of the reason why it's so inspiring when we all come together in this way is because when we do, we reaffirm our commitment, our belief, our knowledge that we can end homelessness, right? We can end housing poverty. We have the data, we have the solutions, we have the resources. We lack only the political will to fund the solutions at the scale necessary to solve the affordable housing crisis. And building that political will, of course, starts with all of us. And I think even in the face of such severe threats to the programs that provide one of life's basic necessities, housing, for some of the most vulnerable people, we never waver in our commitment or in our knowledge that we can solve this crisis. And the threats certainly are significant. And in fact, I think when we think about the potential cuts that we face to affordable housing programs, the threats really haven't been as significant as since back in 1974, when Cushing Dolbear founded the coalition in response to President Nixon's moratorium on the construction of affordable homes. And less than a decade after that, President Ronald Reagan came in and slashed affordable housing programs in order to increase military spending. And in doing so, he ushered in this new modern phenomenon that hadn't existed prior to then, homelessness, right? Tens of thousands of people sleeping on the streets and in cars. And years after those short-sighted and really devastating cuts, there was a new infusion of resources necessary for shelters for people to sleep in. And we've never recovered the same levels of funding targeted towards housing solutions for the lowest income people that we had since that time. And before that time, that level of cuts was unprecedented. And it remained so until now. And it seems that President Trump is eager to follow in the footsteps of President Reagan by slashing HUD programs in order to increase military spending. So at a time when the United States spends more on its military budget than the next 8 top military spending countries combined, President Trump seeks to increase military spending by tens of billions of dollars, paid for by eliminating or dramatically reducing much of the social safety net that serves the lowest income, the most vulnerable people across the country. So these budget cuts would have a devastating impact on millions of the lowest income people across the country. Over 200,000 people with Section 8 vouchers, these are seniors, people with disabilities, veterans, families with kids struggling to get by, would be at risk of losing their assistance and facing possible eviction and eventual homelessness. This at a time when just 1 in 4 households in need of and eligible for rental assistance gets any help at all. The rest, the majority of people in need, they wait on years or decades-long waiting lists, hoping to win what's essentially a housing lottery because there is such a lack of resources. President Trump wants to gut the public housing program, a crucial source of affordable housing for millions of low-income people across the country at a time when the public housing capital backlog needs are upwards of $40 billion. He would eliminate CDBG and home investments partnership programs, starving local communities of the funding they need to create and rehab affordable homes, and the money that's needed to revitalize distressed communities. And the list, unfortunately, goes on. He would eliminate the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness. He would eliminate the Legal Services Corporation, which is often the only resource available to low-income people to prevent unwarranted evictions. He would eliminate the low-income home energy assistance program that literally keeps the heat on through cold winters in the homes of seniors and families with kids. So these proposed cuts are simply unconscionable, and they are unacceptable. And unfortunately, there's more. Outside of the budget process, President Trump seeks to implement work requirements for Medicaid recipients, putting punitive requirements in between some of the most vulnerable people with disabilities and seniors and the often life-saving health care that they need. He's working to implement expensive and ineffective drug testing for unemployment insurance, and he will almost certainly move forward with attempts to apply similar punitive requirements across the social safety net, including to affordable housing programs. So there's a few things that are important to keep in mind when it comes to this budget. The first is that this proposed budget has nothing to do with reducing the deficit, right? It is simply about increasing military spending at the expense of programs serving struggling people across the country. A second important thing to know is that the proposed HUD budget claims that savings of over $3 billion can be found through, quote, reforms and efficiencies. So that's just mathematically impossible. Don't believe that one for a moment. The cuts that are contemplated in this budget necessitate cutting back on programs that house low-income people. And the third and the most important thing to keep in mind about this budget proposal is that we can and we will stop these harmful cuts and these harmful policy proposals from being enacted. So that work starts now. It starts here, it starts today, it continues tomorrow when you go to Capitol Hill and in the days ahead. Because this is just the beginning of what will be a long and protracted fight to fund the federal government, both for this fiscal year and the next. And you'll hear said that the president's proposal is just a marker. It's just a starting point for discussion and debate, and that it will not become law. And that's almost certainly true, right? This proposal is already receiving a very cool reception on Capitol Hill from Republicans and Democrats. There's a saying in DC that the president proposes and Congress disposes. And that's probably never been more true than this year with this extreme overreach in this president's proposal. But that said, we cannot afford to be complacent, right? Not even for a moment, because this budget proposal moves the goalposts so far that it can make cuts only half as deep, or protecting some programs that were slated for elimination while still cutting others seen as reasonable compromises. And they're not. That's unacceptable. Also unacceptable are suggestions that regular annual funding in an appropriations bill can be replaced with possible one-time funding in a remotely possible infrastructure spending bill. That's also not acceptable. Instead, we have to do both. We have to fully fund HUD and USDA programs through appropriations bills, and we have to increase investments in the National Housing Trust Fund, in public housing capital repairs, and others through an infrastructure spending package. So it won't be easy. We have our work cut out for us, right? And there will be drama, there will be showdowns, there may even be shutdowns. And throughout it all, we will be constant, we will be committed, we will be loud in our advocacy to protect affordable housing programs. The National Low-Income Housing Coalition's Campaign for Housing and Community Development Funding, or CHCDF, has never been more important. It's never been more impactful. So together with leaders of over 70 national housing and community development organizations, we work together to ensure the highest possible funding levels for HUD and USDA programs. Just this weekend, we sent up to Congress a letter with over 3,600 organizations from across the country urging full funding for these programs. Thanks to all of your action and your engagement on that, that's a powerful statement of support, and we're just getting started. So thank you. Now, many have been asking, what does Dr. Ben Carson, the new HUD secretary, think about all of this, and where has he been through this process? And that's certainly a fair question. So, he and his staff have been quick to remind that Dr. Carson had not yet been confirmed, and he was not in the HUD building when this budget proposal was put together, and that's true. And he has said that his input was not part of this budget proposal because he wasn't the confirmed HUD secretary yet, and that's true. And this budget proposal was all Donald Trump and OMB Director Mick Mulvaney, right? And he has also noted that while the top line numbers have been set, the negotiations over what the details of that budget will look like, how those cuts will play out among the programs, is still being negotiated. And he's using his listening tour in part to inform those decisions. And now that he is in the building, and he is HUD secretary, and he's part of this administration's leadership, our job is to hold him to the commitments that he's made throughout this process. Because when he was confirmed for HUD secretary, and since that time, he has said a lot of positive things about the programs that we care about. He committed to, quote, housing as many families as possible in safe, affordable housing. He said that when he's confirmed, he will, quote, look for ways to expand affordable housing options everywhere. He said that safety net programs are important, and he vowed that he would, quote, never abolish one without having an alternative. In fact, he called doing so unconscionable. He called Section 8 vouchers and other rental assistance programs essential. And he committed, maybe most importantly, internally within the administration to be a vocal advocate for these programs. So, as you know, Dr. Carson accepted our invitation to come speak with us all here today. And so I look forward to hearing how he will uphold these commitments, and I look forward to working with all of you to continue holding him to them. And I also look forward to looking for areas of commonality, places where we can work with Dr. Carson to advance some of our priorities. Because while we must remain vigilant, right, against cuts and threats to the programs that we care about, and we will, we also have to look for and recognize and seize opportunities to move forward. And there's a number of improvements to HUD programs that practitioners, advocates, residents of public housing, and Section 8 voucher holders have sought for decades that could fit within Dr. Carson's frame of self-sufficiency. So this could be the moment where public housing residents can achieve a top policy priority of improvements to the Section 3 program, right? Working to improve opportunities for residents of HUD-subsidized programs to gain economic opportunities while working to improve their own communities. And I expect we'll hear something from Dr. Carson today about Section 3. We can work together to expand and further improve the family self-sufficiency program so that households have an opportunity to save up for their futures. We can work with Dr. Carson and Republicans in Congress to consolidate Public Housing Authority administration to better target community development block grants. And also, while Dr. Carson is coming here today to share with us his thoughts and his vision, we want to be sure that in the future, in the very near future, he spends ample time hearing ours and seeing our work on the ground to create affordable homes and revitalize distressed communities, to hear from residents who live in public housing. So today, I'll present to Dr. Carson a list of suggested stops on his listening tour so that we can be part of it and he can be listening to us. And so we have a list. We've reached out to our state partners. We've reached out to resident organizations and asked if you want to be part of this list to present to Dr. Carson and ask that he come to your communities. So if you haven't yet had a chance to sign up for that and you'd like to, just find me or somebody else from the staff, let us know and we'll make sure that you're part of that request as well. So part of what makes this moment in time, I think, so unique and so remarkable is that in addition to the really significant threats that we face, we also have tremendous opportunity to advance towards our mission of affordable homes for the lowest income people. Cushing Dolbear started talking and writing about the need to rebalance federal housing policy back in 1974. For years, she shared the injustice, the inequities, the absurdities of the mortgage interest deduction. It turned out on that issue, she was well before her time. Right, but her tenacious advocacy and research started to turn the tide. And Sheila Crowley's and all of your continued dedication to rebalancing federal housing policy, taken up by other leaders like Ron Terwilliger and Keith Ellison, Mark Calabria and Barbara Lee, Stan Humphreys and Chairman David Camp, slowly, surely, steadily chipped away at the mythology built up around the deduction, revealing it for what it is, an ineffective, highly regressive, and poorly targeted use of federal resources. Did you know that 15% of the benefits of the mortgage interest deduction go to the top 1% of earners in this country? That means that as taxpayers, we spend $10.5 billion a year to subsidize the homes of some of the wealthiest people in the world. That kind of waste can't be justified, especially at a time where there are people with no homes at all. So those decades of research and advocacy and thought leadership on the mortgage interest deduction led us to where we are today. The change that we have sought for over 40 years is before us, right now. The mortgage interest deduction is on the table to be reformed in comprehensive tax reform. And here in DC, we are working with Republicans on the House Ways and Means Committee, on the Senate Finance Committee, in the White House, who are actively considering and debating changes to the mortgage interest deduction. And we're working with Democrats to ensure that when the deduction is reformed, that we keep those savings and reinvest it in housing programs for the lowest income people. And along the West Coast, we're seeing NLIHC state partners like Housing California and Oregon Opportunity Network and the Nonprofit Housing Association of Northern California working on their state mortgage interest deductions to reform them and retain savings for affordable housing programs. So we're seeing that change is possible. And we have now this alignment of tax reform as a top priority for the administration and for the White House, a new willingness to consider reforms to the mortgage interest deduction, and a growing need for affordable homes for the lowest income people. And together, it offers us a tremendous opportunity. And it's an opportunity for all of the people, all of the organizations, the members of Congress who haven't wanted to get into the debate of whether or how we should reform the mortgage interest deduction, to now align strongly around a simple message. When the mortgage interest deduction is reformed, we must retain those housing dollars and reinvest them in housing programs that serve the lowest income people. So it's time now for us all to be united for homes. And keeping those housing dollars in housing programs is our great challenge now. And it certainly won't be easy, but it is possible. So for years, people would tell us that reforming the mortgage interest deduction wasn't possible, but it is. And now some will say that retaining any of the savings for rental housing programs is impossible, but it is. And in fact, it's been done before. It's very similar to how the low-income housing tax credit program was created. So back in 1986, there were, when comprehensive tax reform last happened, there were a number of uncapped, poorly targeted, ineffective housing tax expenditures that were slated to be eliminated. And at that time, the housing field came together and demanded that those housing dollars stay in housing programs and that they be better targeted and used more efficiently and capped. And so the low-income housing tax credit program was created. And so it's time now for us to do it again. We can't allow those housing subsidy dollars to be used to pay for a further giveaway to corporations or to wealthy individuals. So we have to capture those savings. It's $240 billion over 10 years, and use it to significantly expand programs that serve the lowest income people, to expand the National Housing Trust Fund program, to expand rental assistance through Section 8 vouchers or a renter's tax credit. And in the process, we can provide a tax break to 25 million low and moderate income households and at long last rebalance federal housing policy. So we continue to face the same opponents. Thank you. Absolutely, let's do it. So we continue to face the same powerful opponents that we've faced for decades. And they're spending tens of millions of dollars to protect and defend this indefensible system. And we don't have their money. We never will. We can't compete in that way, right? But we have numbers. We have people. And together, we are even more powerful. So if you haven't joined the United for Homes campaign yet, what are you waiting for? Please join. We need you. We can't do this on our own, but we can do it together. So please join us. And of course, I can't guarantee that Congress will actually be able to achieve comprehensive tax reform. I have no idea. I can't say for sure that when they do, if they do, that they will reform the mortgage interest deduction. But what I can say with certainty is that for both comprehensive tax reform and reforming the mortgage interest deduction, that both have never been more possible in the last 30 years than it is right now, and we must seize this opportunity. There will be more opportunities to expand resources for housing for the lowest income people. At some point, Congress will address the housing finance system and look to reform Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and when they do, we'll be there working to significantly expand the National Housing Trust Fund program. Congress may work at some point on an infrastructure spending bill, and when they do, we'll be there, urging expansion of the trust fund of public housing capital repair dollars. So, and I want to leave you with just one last thing to remember. In in the turmoil, in the uncertainty, in the chaos, in those days where it can feel like maybe as a country we're taking a big step backwards. And I want you just to remember in those times that we are moving forward. When Congress first came into session back in January, and the new Congress had just been sworn in, one of the first acts of the conservative wing of the House Republicans was to eliminate their own transparency and eliminate their own oversight. And collectively, we were outraged. And we shone a spotlight, and we flooded their offices with calls, and we won. And this administration has tried time and then time again to prevent refugees and immigrants from Muslim-majority countries from coming to this country. And lawyers flooded airports. They flooded the streets. They filed legal challenges that stopped those harmful changes in their tracks. Just last week, the president sent another request to Congress to cut even deeper into the social safety net in order to fund a wall along the southern border. And Congress, both Republicans and Democrats, very promptly said no. And after 7 years of hammering the need to repeal the Affordable Care Act, President Trump stepped into the White House and aggressively pushed forward legislation to take health care away from 24 million people, to reduce Medicaid expansion, and with it, the resources we need for supportive housing services to end homelessness. And they pushed, and Democrats and moderate Republicans and all of us said no. And they failed spectacularly. And each time they failed because they underestimated you. They underestimated us. They underestimated our perseverance, our tenacity. They underestimated our willingness to call, to email, to show up at town halls, to march. And they underestimated our insistence on nothing less than equity and social justice. Right? And that's exactly why we will continue to move forward towards our mission of ending homelessness and housing poverty. We'll succeed because we are on the side of social justice. And as Dr. King said, the moral arc of the universe bends toward it, right? But as President Obama reminded us, that arc doesn't bend on its own. And that's where we all come in. And so each of us here today represents dozens or hundreds or thousands more dedicated to the same cause of ending homelessness and housing poverty, and knowing that there are tens of thousands of us across the country committed to the same cause, and that our numbers are ever growing, makes me confident that we will prevail in the end. So thank you all. Thank you for your good work, for your important work. Thank you for being willing to show up. Thank you for your advocacy in today, in this coming year, and in the years to come. It's never been more important. Thank you.